The journey has been long and the path difficult, but the final resolution is finally within your reach at the end of the road. Stay with us as we piece together the last bit of the puzzle. Hit subscribe now and witness the most important ending.
By the time I realized my hands were shaking, I was already crouched behind my own couch at 2 in the morning, whispering into my phone so quietly I could barely hear myself. My daughter was asleep upstairs, and there were 2 men in my driveway. But I'm getting ahead of myself. That night started the same way all my nights had started for the past 8 months. Quietly, exhaustingly, alone. I moved back to Clover Hill in February, right after the divorce was finalized. Not my first choice. Not my second either. But it was my mother's house. Technically mine now, since she'd passed the previous spring, and it was paid off, and I had a 7-year-old who needed a bedroom and stability, and a school that wasn't going to change again. My name is Ivy. I teach 4th grade at Millbrook Elementary. And I am very good at keeping it together in front of 23 8-year-olds, while quietly falling apart inside. The house on Clover Hill Road is a 1960s ranch style, 3 bedrooms, a carport that fits 1.5 cars if you're optimistic, and a backyard that backs up to a chain link fence and a stand of old oak trees. The neighbors on the left, I never really met them, a young couple who seemed to work odd hours, moved out in March. The house sat empty for a few weeks. Then in April someone new moved in. His name was Edmund. I knew that because I'd seen it on a piece of mail that had accidentally ended up in my box. Edmund Hale. He was maybe 65, gray-haired, heavy-set, in the way that used to be called stocky, and he walked with a slight limp that I noticed the first time I saw him carrying boxes from a rented truck to his front door. He didn't wave. He didn't introduce himself. He just glanced over at me once when I was getting my daughter off the school bus, nodded once, like I was a stop sign he'd acknowledged, and went back inside. Fine. I wasn't looking for new best friend. I had enough going on. My daughter's name is Rosie. She's 7, she has her father's dark eyes and my tendency to overanalyze everything, and she'd been through enough upheaval that I was trying very hard to give her 1 year, just one, of boring, predictable stability. New house, new town, same mom, same routine. Wake up at 6:15. Eggs or cereal. Bus at 7:40. Pick up at 3:10. Homework, dinner, bath, stories, bed. Repeat. Edmund Hale didn't fit into that routine. He wasn't part of it. He was just the quiet man next door, who sometimes sat on his front steps in the early evening, drinking what looked like iced tea, watching the street the way old men do when they've got nowhere else to be. I won't lie. There were moments in those first few months when he made me vaguely uneasy. Not in a dramatic way, just in the way that a closed door can make you uneasy when you don't know what's behind it. He didn't make small talk. He didn't put out decorations at Easter or a flag on Memorial Day. When I waved at him once from the driveway, he raised his chin a fraction of an inch. That was it. I told myself he was just private. Some people are. I'm a little that way myself. The note appeared on a Thursday in October. I found it when I got home from school at 4:15, tucked under the front door so that just a corner of it was sticking out into the entryway. A piece of plain white notepaper, folded once. No envelope. No name on the outside. I unfolded it standing in the doorway, still holding my tote bag, Rosie tugging at my sleeve asking if we had any of those orange crackers left. Don't leave your car in the carport tonight. Park it down the street instead. I read it twice. Then I read it a third time. I looked next door. Edmund's car was in his driveway. His front door was closed. His lights weren't on yet. Don't leave your car in the carport tonight. My first reaction was annoyance, honestly. Who was this man to tell me where to park my own car? In my own carport, on my own property? I had enough people telling me what to do. My ex-husband's attorney, the HR department at my school, my own mother for the first 42 years of my life. I did not need unsolicited instructions from a stranger who'd never once bothered to say good morning. My second reaction was confusion. Why? The note didn't explain anything. Just the instruction and his initials. That was it. I put the note on the counter. I got Rosie her crackers. I made dinner, pasta the fast kind, because it was Thursday and Thursdays I had no patience left. We did homework at the kitchen table. I read her 2 chapters of her book. I tucked her in at 8:30. And then I stood in the kitchen, looking at that piece of paper. My car was a 2019 Subaru Outback. Silver. Nothing remarkable about it. I'd had it for 4 years. I couldn't think of a single reason anyone would want to do anything to it. But the note wasn't asking me to do something difficult. It was asking me to park down the street. That was it. An inconvenience of maybe 40 feet. I don't know why I did it. I almost didn't. I stood at the kitchen window for a long moment, looked out at the carport, and thought about how ridiculous it was. A grown woman rearranging her entire evening routine. Because a man she barely knew had passed her a cryptic note like something out of a bad thriller. But I moved the car. I drove it half a block down, parked it under the streetlight in front of the Kowalski-Briggs house. They were in Florida for the winter. I knew that from the mail piling up. And walked back in the dark, feeling slightly foolish. I locked the front door. I checked the back door. I went to bed. I woke up at 2:14 in the morning. I don't know what woke me. There wasn't a sound that I can point to. No bang, no alarm, nothing dramatic. Just that particular quality of alertness that some part of your brain reserves for the hours when you're a single parent and you're the only adult in the house and something feels wrong. Not loud, wrong, quiet wrong. I lay still for a moment and listened. The house was quiet. The street outside was quiet. Rosie's room was quiet. I could see the sliver of light from her nightlight under her door. I almost went back to sleep. Then I heard it. A voice. Two voices, actually. Low, male, coming from outside. My carport runs along the left side of the house, the side that faces Edmund's property. My bedroom window is on that same side. I got up slowly, staying low out of some instinct I can't entirely explain, and crossed to the window. I didn't turn on any lights. I moved the curtain back half an inch, just enough. There were two men in my carport. They were maybe 30-35, both in dark jackets. One of them was crouched down near the back of the space where my car would have been if I hadn't moved it. And he was holding something. A gas can. One of those red plastic ones, the kind you buy at any hardware store. He was tilting it, pouring something out onto the concrete. The other man was standing near the entrance, watching the street. I stood at that window and I stopped breathing. My first thought, and I know this sounds strange, was that I must be misunderstanding what I was seeing. That there was some other explanation. Because the alternative was that two men were in my carport at 2 in the morning pouring gasoline on my property, and that was too specific and too terrifying to accept in the first 3 seconds. Then the man near the entrance pulled something from his jacket pocket. A lighter. He flicked it once, casually, and the little flame caught for a moment before he closed it again. Like he was just checking that it worked. I backed away from the window so fast I knocked my knee on the nightstand and bit down on my lip to keep from making a sound. My phone was on the nightstand. I grabbed it. My hands were shaking badly enough that I mistyped my passcode twice before I got it open. I dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? There are two men in my carport. I was whispering. I didn't plan to whisper, it just came out that way. Barely air, barely sound. I think they have a gas can. I think they're going to set a fire. The dispatcher's voice was calm, professional. What is your address, ma'am? I gave it to her. My voice was steady enough for that somehow. The muscle memory of reciting your own address is remarkable under pressure. Are you inside the house? Yes, my daughter is upstairs. She's 7. She's asleep. Okay, I need you to stay inside, stay away from the windows, and stay on the line with me. I'm sending officers to your location right now. Can you do that? Yes. And then, because I was still not entirely sure what I was dealing with, I saw a gas can. One of them has a lighter. Okay. Officers are en route. What's your name? Ivy. Ivy Callahan. Ivy, I need you to stay calm. You're doing great. How many individuals did you see? Two men. They're in the carport. On the left side of the house. I don't know if they're still there. I moved away from the window. That's okay. You did the right thing. Can you get to an interior room away from the carport side of the house? I looked toward Rosie's room. Her door with the nightlight glow underneath. If I left my bedroom, I'd be in the hallway, which ran through the center of the house. I can go to the hallway, I said. My daughter's room is at the back. Bop. Go ahead and do that, and keep the phone with you. I moved through my dark bedroom, into the dark hallway, and sat down on the floor with my back against the wall between my door and Rosie's. I could hear the dispatcher breathing. I could hear my own heartbeat. I could hear nothing from outside. That was almost worse. The silence. Are they still there? I whispered. I don't have eyes on your location, Ivy. Officers should be there in a few minutes. I'm going to keep you on the line. A few minutes. I sat in my hallway, and I thought about the lighter and the gas can, and the fact that my daughter was 10 feet away from me, and I had no idea what was happening on the other side of my walls. I thought about the note. Don't leave your car in the carport tonight. He'd known. Edmund Hale had known something was going to happen tonight. He'd known specifically enough to warn me about the carport. Which meant, I heard tires on the street. Slow tires. More than one vehicle. Then I heard voices again. But this time there were more of them, and they were louder and sharper, and one of them said, "Stop, stop, get down." And I heard running, and something that sounded like a scuffle, and then more voices overlapping. "Ma'am." The dispatcher again. "Officers are on scene. Can you hear them outside?" "Yes," I said. My voice came out strange, compressed. "Yes, I can hear them. They're securing the scene. An officer is going to knock on your front door. Don't open it until they identify themselves." "Okay, okay." The knock came about 90 seconds later. I went to the front door, still holding the phone, still barefoot, still in the oversized t-shirt I'd slept in. I looked through the peephole first, a habit my mother had drilled into me, and saw the uniform and the badge and the squad car parked at the curb with its lights going. I opened the door. The officer was a woman, maybe late 30s, dark hair pulled back. She held up her badge. "Miss Callahan? I'm Officer Delaney. Are you and your daughter okay?" "Yes," I said. "We're fine. What happened? Are they?" "We have 2 individuals in custody. Can I come inside?" Rosie was still asleep. I don't know how she slept through it. But she did, and I was grateful in a way I can't fully describe. That deep animal relief of a parent who has been very frightened and whose child doesn't know it yet. I sat in my kitchen with Officer Delaney and another officer named Watts while they asked me questions. How long had I been at this address? Did I recognize the men? Did I have any idea why someone might target my car? That last question stopped me. "My car," I said. "They were specifically after my car?" Officer Delaney looked at me carefully. "That's what it appears. Based on where the accelerant was poured. Concentrated in the space where a vehicle would have been parked. The concrete, not the walls or structure." "What does your vehicle look like?" I told her. "Silver Outback, 2019. Parked down the block." She's wrote it down. "Do you have any disputes with anyone? A custody situation, a coworker conflict, someone from your past?" I thought about it. Teaching 4th grade doesn't generate a lot of enemies. My divorce had been brutal emotionally, but my ex-husband. We'll call him what he was. Someone I no longer had any interest in discussing. Had relocated to Phoenix in June and was, by all accounts, getting on with his life. I couldn't think of anyone. And then I remembered something. 3 weeks ago, there had been an incident at school. I have a student. I'll call him Theo, which isn't his name. Whose father had come to pick him up one afternoon and got into a confrontation with another parent in the parking lot. The school's resource officer had gotten involved. I'd been the one standing nearby, and I'd been the one who'd given a statement to the district when the other family filed a complaint. The father, I'll call him Mr. Rourke, had been banned from school property pending a review. He hadn't been happy about that. He'd said so, loudly, in the parking lot, while looking directly at me. I told Officer Delaney. She wrote that down too. By 4 a.m, I had answered every question twice, signed a statement, and been given a case number and the direct line of a detective named Vasquez who would be following up. The gas can was evidence. The 2 men were in custody. They'd been caught before they could do anything beyond pouring accelerant, which was enough for arson charges. They hadn't said anything yet about who'd hired them or why. After the officers left, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. The note was still on the counter. "Don't leave your car in the carport tonight. E.H." I picked it up and looked at it again. At 5 a.m, I walked next door. I know that's an unusual thing to do. I know most people would have waited until a reasonable hour and then knocked politely. But I'd been awake for 3 hours with my heart in my throat, and I needed to understand. I knocked on Edmund Hale's door. He answered in about 40 seconds. Which told me he hadn't been asleep either. He was dressed. Same gray cardigan he'd been wearing the day before, dark pants, and he looked at me through the screen door with an expression that I couldn't quite read. Not surprised. Not alarmed. Just watchful. "Mrs. Callahan," he said. "You knew," I said. It wasn't an accusation exactly. It came out more like a question with no room left in it for anything but the truth. He was quiet for a moment. Then he pushed the screen door open. "Come in," he said. His house was neat in the way that houses are neat when someone has lived alone in them for a very long time. Everything had a place. There were no excess objects, no clutter, no signs of the kind of comfortable disorder that builds up when there are other people around. A bookshelf along one wall, mostly paperbacks, an armchair near the window. A small TV on a stand turned off. He didn't offer me coffee. He sat in the armchair and looked at me with those steady gray eyes, and I sat on the edge of the couch, still in my sleep shirt, still barefoot, and waited. I was sitting out front yesterday evening, he said. I do that most evenings. 8 o'clock or so, when it cools down. I was out there and two men came walking through the neighborhood, slowly. Too slowly. Looking at houses the way people look when they're not looking at the architecture. He paused. They stopped in front of your place. I couldn't hear everything. But I heard enough. They were talking about the silver car and the carport. And something about sending a message. He said those last 3 words with a particular flatness, the way people say phrases they find distasteful. I didn't hear a name. I didn't know who sent them or why, but I knew they meant to do damage. Why didn't you call the police? I asked. Or just knock on my door and tell me directly? He looked at his hands for a moment. Because I didn't see their faces clearly. It was getting dark, and I wasn't certain enough of what I'd heard to make an accusation. If I'd called the police on 2 men walking through the neighborhood, there wouldn't have been much to go on. He glanced up. And I didn't know you well enough to knock on your door at 8 o'clock and tell you that I'd overheard something that might mean nothing. Something shifted in his expression. I should have done more. I know that. You did enough, I said, and I meant it, even with the image of the gas can and the lighter still sitting somewhere behind my eyes. If I'd left my car there? I know, he said. We sat in silence for a moment. Why did you move here? I asked. Not to change the subject. I'm not sure why I asked. Maybe because it was 5 in the morning, and the night had stripped away the formalities. And I was sitting in a near stranger's living room, and I just wanted to understand who he was. He was quiet for long enough that I thought he might not answer. My wife grew up 3 blocks from here, he said finally. She passed 4 years ago. I sold the house in Cincinnati and I wanted to be somewhere that still felt like her, a little. Somewhere she'd walked around when she was young, and thought the world was full of possibility. He said it matter-of-factly, without any bid for sympathy. I'm not always good at people, I'm aware of that. But I notice things, so it's a habit I can't seem to break. I looked at him across the quiet room. What was her name? I asked. Paulette, he said, and the way he said it, just that one word, soft at the edges, told me everything about who Edmund Hale was. I walked back to my house as the sun was starting to come up, pink along the tree line. The kind of October morning that reminds you there's still beauty in the world, even when the night before was terrifying. Rosie was awake when I got inside. She was standing at the top of the stairs in her pajamas, the ones with the little foxes on them, holding her stuffed rabbit and looking at me with those dark, careful eyes. Mom, were there police here? Yes, baby, I said. But everything is okay. We're safe. She thought about this with the seriousness that 7-year-olds apply to important information. Did something happen to the car? No, I said. The car is fine. It's down the street. I climbed the stairs and sat down next to her and put my arm around her. She leaned into me the way she always does, head against my shoulder, rabbit clutched to her chest. I need to tell you something. What? Our neighbor, Mr. Hale. The man next door, he helped us last night. He kept us safe. She considered this. The quiet man? That's him. Another pause. Should we make him something? I almost laughed. That's my daughter. The world presents her with a crisis and her first instinct is to bake. Yeah, I said. I think we should. The detective, Vasquez, called me 2 days later. The 2 men in custody had been identified. They had priors. One for vandalism, one for petty theft and assault. They were hired hands, essentially, and they eventually gave up a name, Mr. Rourke, whose son I taught, whose parking lot confrontation I'd reported. He was arrested on Friday morning. The charge was solicitation of arson, among others. I was in my classroom when I got the call. 22 minutes before my students arrived. I sat at my desk afterward and stared at the whiteboard, which had Wednesday's math warm-up still on it, because I'd forgotten to erase it the night before. And I thought about how a man had looked at me in a school parking lot 3 weeks ago, and decided I'd cost him enough that he'd pay someone to burn my car, all because I'd done my job, all because I'd told the truth about what I'd seen. I erased the whiteboard. I set out the morning work. I went and stood at the door to welcome my students when they came off the buses at 8:15, the same way I do every morning. And I smiled when I saw their faces, and I meant it. That's the thing about surviving a frightening night. The next day looks different, not easier necessarily, but more vivid, more worth showing up for. Rosie and I made banana bread that Saturday. Her choice, she said. Mr. Hale looked like someone who ate banana bread, which I found both entirely unfounded and oddly accurate. We wrapped it in a dish towel and walked next door. He opened the door and looked at the bread, and then at Rosie, and then at me. "We wanted to say thank you," Rosie said, with the formal gravity of a child delivering a prepared speech, "for helping us. Mom said you kept us safe." Edmund Hale looked at my daughter for a moment. Something in his face did a quiet, complicated thing. "Your mother kept you safe," he said. "She listened." "That's not nothing." Rosie considered this. "But you wrote the note." "I did. So you both did it," she said, with the air of someone resolving a debate. He almost smiled. It was the first time I'd seen him come close to it, and it changed the whole geography of his face in a way that made him look, briefly, like someone who had laughed easily once. "I suppose we did," he said. He took the banana bread. He said thank you, quietly, genuinely. We said goodbye, and walked back across the dead grass between our driveways in the thin October sunlight. I didn't know then that Edmund would become, over the following months, one of the people I relied on most. That he'd become the person who noticed when my porch light bulb burned out before I did. Who left my mail on the step when it ended up in his box. Who sat with Rosie on his front steps one afternoon, when I had a parent phone call that ran long, and she needed somewhere to be. I didn't know he'd teach her how to identify 3 different kinds of oak trees, or that she would start calling him Mr. Ed, which he tolerated with a dignity that suggested he found it secretly pleasing. I didn't know any of that yet. What I knew walking back to my house that October morning was that a man I had barely spoken to had noticed something in the dark, and had done what he could with what he had. A piece of paper, a pencil, and the quiet conviction that it was better to say something than not. And I had listened. That was all it took, just that. A note, and a woman who almost didn't move her car but did anyway, standing in her kitchen at midnight feeling slightly foolish. I think about that sometimes when Rosie asks me why we have to pay attention to things, why we can't just mind our own business, why we have to notice what's happening around us. I don't have a simple answer for her. I just tell her what my mother used to tell me, back when I was the one who didn't want to pay attention to anything. The world is full of people trying to tell you something important. The hard part is learning to listen even when you're not sure you trust the source. Edmund Hale is not a warm man. He's not easy or open or charming. He'll probably never make small talk. And he'll never wave first. And if you pass him on the street on a bad day, he might not acknowledge you at all. But he noticed. And he said something. And because he did, my daughter woke up the next morning and asked me about the police. And then immediately asked if we could make banana bread. I will never be able to explain to her how much that morning meant to me. How ordinary it was, and how extraordinary. How standing in my kitchen watching her measure out flour. Very seriously, very carefully, with the tip of her tongue between her teeth, felt like the whole world being handed back to me intact. I moved to this house because I had no better option. I stayed because it turned out to be exactly what I needed. And the quiet man next door, the one I'd written off as distant and strange, and not worth the effort of knowing. He turned out to be the realest neighbor I've ever had. You don't always get to choose your neighbors, but sometimes, if you're lucky, the right person ends up on the other side of the fence at exactly the right time. And sometimes all it takes is a note,